My name is Mary Plaster, and I'm a paper mache artist and an event coordinator. I make masks and puppets for a variety of venues, all the way from the street to plays, and actually right now I'm working on a ballet. And it's the Carnival of the Animals, so I'm creating a total of 19 characters. And one of the funniest ones is the tortoise, which I've made out of fabric, which is I can sew. I usually prefer things made out of paper mache, but this one has to be soft for many reasons because the dancer will be moving in it, and it's not just a hard hat on top. But so here's the shell of the tortoise, and then there's a front piece, and whoops. So the arms will come out here and the legs. And then this is the head, which I'm going to have to figure out how to add some eyes. So most of them are paper mache. Here's another fabric guy, is the elephant, because it has so many parts that need to be moving, like the ears and the trunk. So it's for many applications and many levels of finesse. And then I also coordinate an event in Duluth every year called Duluth All Souls Night, which is something acknowledging our ancestors and our grief, and trying to move that toward having energy to transform into a justice-making world.
We begin the march of the funeral of bad ideas. Bad ideas.
Right now, I think there's a lot of inequity in our culture, and it's not being dealt with very well. There's such a big difference between the 1%, as they call it, billions of dollars, and those of us that are struggling for just paying our bills, or worse, people on the street. So I feel like in a just society there wouldn't be such extreme difference. So in my modest way with the puppets, and I do things when we do political events on the street, I'm trying to make an image that's worth 1,000 words, where you just look at something and you can see, oh, I get it. This is Mother Earth, and this is, what we should be doing is honoring the Earth. And it's fast, and it's not giving a long speech like I'm doing right now, but kind of instantaneous, and then you see lots of people working the same puppet, and it kind of indicates we could work together and make big things happen together. When creating images, you can project forward what you want to see in the world, and you can also put what's not working. Then there can be that contrast. So for me, I think art without justice making is shallow. Like if you're not dealing with something overall big in the world, it comes off a little bit more decorative. When I was a teenager and I knew I liked to work with my hands, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to make, I saw one of the earliest May Day parades in the cities in Minneapolis, in the Heart of the Beast Puppet and Mask Theater, and something about the scale of giant puppets. And you can make in puppets anything from a finger puppet to these large beings that are needing, huge groups of people to move. Something about that really spoke to me, and the fact that usually it's some kind of big archetype, that you're trying to drag down the street, that does appeal to people even on a visceral level. If they don't understand exactly what you're trying to say, they can kind of tap in. So again, I mentioned like Mother Earth is a common theme, or having some kind of villain, someone who's making a lot of money on destroying the world. It makes an easy villain, and there's many of those. So that really tapped in. So I went to a regular art school kind of background, but when it came time to making my own work, I decided I really wanted to work with paper mache. And part of my journey involved going to Mexico, and I actually learned a lot of my paper mache work from Mexican artists and a few others that were just living there. But so it was really an earthy, indigenous feel to it, and that really appealed to me. Mexico has been a big influence. It was quite a while ago now, probably 30 years ago, that I lived there, and I don't know, I haven't been back, so I don't know that I could still say that, but at the time in the 80s when I was there, things were handmade and not mass-produced, and it was more about art as everyday, as an everyday important thing, and not reserved for the upper class and galleries. It was out, it's in your home, it's in the streets. I had a real epiphany about what might be called folk art, which I think is just as brilliant as, something that was influenced by the Renaissance in Europe. So a lot of wood carvers and ceramic artists and paper mache. Basically anything that could be made out of something not expensive is what I learned. When I was in high school, I read Carlos Castaneda books, and it talked about he was working with the Mexican shaman and the presence of death, and how I think he said that death is always on your left shoulder. And it's amazing because I've actually thought about that very often, about the idea memento mori. I think I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but that live now because death is coming and then it's over. And so moving to Mexico, it became even more prevalent because of the prevalence of the skeletal figures, which then carried over into puppetry that I was noticing in the United States with Peter Schumann and his giant skeletons, and the ones I saw in the Heart of the Beast Puppet and Mask Theater. So death has been something prevalent in my own personal philosophy, and it's very prevalent in Mexico itself. This probably can't deal with it so deeply here, but in seeing the Day of the Dead authentically in a few places when I was living there, every town celebrates in a different way, so it's not even something that's universal, but a lot of it involves candles and building, and ofrenda means offering, so it's offering their favorite foods. If there's usually apples and alcohol, certain kinds of candies, when you're remembering somebody and what they enjoyed when they were on Earth. And Day of the Dead itself is sort of a veil, where the rest of the year we can't sort of communicate as if our ancestors are with us, but on Day of the Dead, we kind of suspend that reality, and the dead and the living are together again. It's interesting, my own experience having to learn about grief from another culture.
We have gathered tonight to celebrate those we have loved and lost through art and community. We ask the universe for peace for the dead, healing for the living, and creation of a better world.
as a child, I really enjoyed monarch butterflies, and I was seriously only 7 or 8, and I was bringing them in jars and watching this life cycle and the transformation. And when we'd release the butterflies, we had no idea where did they go after this, especially in the fall. You know, I had heard that they had to have gone somewhere warm because they sure don't stay out our Minnesota winters. But we didn't know exactly where they went. I think certain people in Mexico knew where they went, but there was not a communication there about the migration. Monarchs were everywhere when I was a child, and when my kids were born, I used to raise a lot of butterflies with them. And I started learning about how the population was declining so drastically. So I think the population of monarchs is down about 90%. So I kind of panicked, you know, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, trying to grow milkweed in my own yard. It was sort of a struggle to get it established. And now it's a wild jungle of milkweed out there. And then I also started helping the caterpillars along if I saw they were struggling. If a flock of birds goes through and picks them off, or some horrible insect that has some pointy thing that it inserts into the caterpillar, it sucks out all the juice. It's some crazy drama going out in the garden all the time. So occasionally I bring them in and sort of assist them along in their transformation, and then I release them and think about the fact that they're flying down to about the place that I lived when I was, you know, in my 20s. It's been a really interesting connection. My daughter was born in Mexico and is of a tribe that's from that region. So there's a lot of levels to all of it. Butterflies are considered to be the soul in many cultures, but especially in Mexico. The return of the butterflies at that time of year, at the Day of the Dead time of year, is also really serendipitous. So the migration is timed with Day of the Dead ceremonies. When they find their way to these fir trees and hang in these really heavy clusters from the branches, they hang out there until March or so, and they fly back up to Texas and start the whole cycle again. So yeah, the two transformations of caterpillar into chrysalis and then chrysalis into butterfly really calls, you know, that birth-death cycle. And the fact that sometimes what looks like death is actually transformation is really profound. I was working with a group in the cities called Bare Bones Puppets, and for a couple of years I was working with them, and I was like, why don't we do a giant skeleton puppet? Because I had seen giant skeletons in the work of Peter Schumann, who was the head of Bread and Puppet Theater that started in 1963, and was the influence of In the Heart of the Beast Puppet and Mass Theater, also had a giant skeleton puppet. But my vision was to have a marionette that would hang from a tree where the Bare Bones Puppets performed on in a place, I can't remember the name of it, it's Hidden Park or something, Hidden Falls Park in Minneapolis, actually St. Paul, it's right on the river. So I wrote a grant, and I was amazed when I got the grant, and the grant was to work with more of an engineer, because I'm more of a facade, you know, I do the paper mache kind of art additive, but the inner workings of a giant marionette really needed someone who was good at, you know, what kind of joint would make this go only that far, but a wrist that goes like that and a shoulder that goes like that. So we hired Chris Letter to help me figure this thing out, and actually had a skull already that was from the first All Souls Night in Duluth that I made, hoping that I could make a giant skeleton at some point. So my son Zach carried that thing for years as a backpack puppet. So there's a long sort of a backbone that goes into the skull, and he wears it on a backpack, and we covered him up with a black cloak, so he was more of a death figure. So we took the head from that. That was what the grant I wrote was, let's build Max a body. And so we did, and the first performance was hanging from a tree at night with spotlights, so you could hardly see the strings, or you could hardly see the puppeteers were wearing black, and so it was just this really magical thing for the audiences up on a hill, and seeing 17-foot tall skeleton dance. You know, he actually crawled on, and we hook him, you know, his hands and feet, and raise him up and make them dance and take them down and then pull it apart also. So it was this amazing performance. And then brought it back for All Souls Night, the 10th anniversary. Hung it from the Depot Great Hall beam. I think the most impactful thing about working with something like giant puppets is the fact that you're really forced into community, because to make something giant stand up and move, you're depending on a lot of people and hoping that they share this vision of how this puppet's going to stand up and how it's going to move. And so it forces a cooperation that, as an introvert, I don't think I get that naturally. I would love to just hole up somewhere and just work on little tiny things. But working on something big and trying to make an impact on a community, the giant puppets has really kind of forced me into a little bit of growth. Duluth All Souls Nights started as a closing reception for an art show that I curated, and I was asked to do puppets, and I suggested street puppets. It was 2008, so that was pretty significant election year, and people were taking to the streets everywhere. Every city has a major puppet theater, I would venture to say, because it's become more available and more popular as Peter Schumann and other artists have demonstrated the power of an image on the street rather than a banner or a sign, you know, an actual, and the scale, you know, the giant skeletons, which were representing war and, you know, violence and the terrible things we do to each other. So I managed to get a skeleton from Peter Schumann and some other things, and a skeleton from In the Heart of the Beast Puppet and Mask Theater, and I made my own skull. And we were talking about how do we close out this exhibit, and my co-curator, who was David Hodges at the Art Institute at the time, said it's kind of unfortunate that our puppets are displayed static. You know, they're not moving. We're making different stands and stuff and able to freeze them in a pose that might be dynamic, but it's not the same as when, you know, they're actually moving down the street and you're seeing the scale, you know, kind of coming at you. So he thought we should do something with the puppets. We looked at the calendar, and the day was actually November 1st, which is Day of the Dead in Mexico and other countries, and it is about the ancestors. And being about the ancestors, we talk about the way the ancestors, or we think that the ancestors lived, and the example that they set, and, you know, what they did to ensure that we're here now, and what are we needing to do to ensure that the future generations are going to be here also. So it was pretty lofty, but and we didn't call it Day of the Dead. We called it All Souls Night, not to be Catholic, but to reclaim the word soul, and emphasize the word all. So we invited everyone to come and actually move these beings that were in the show. And so a lot of them were skeletons, and then we also kind of pulled worldwide celebrations, which included things like a dance together, a spiral dance, and displays that honor our ancestors. So, you know, we did make ofrendas, we made displays, we made shrines, So I invited people into that, and then also to move throughout the evening from place to place and move the puppets. Like, so we went indoors to outdoors. We went around the public library, which I think was a political action at the time. And then we invited a couple of fire dancers that were just getting started in Duluth, which became the Spin Collective. And so many of these fall celebrations incorporate burning. So we did a tiny little fire because it was public, in the library space. But we were trying to honor the fact that sometimes you have to, destroy things, and new things can come out of that. And we wanted people to walk away from the event thinking about justice making and having the energy to do that, because a lot of people are depressed, especially going into winter. You're thinking about the fact that the sun is going to get dimmer, and so to go into it with a bit of fire and think loftily, justice for all.
Children of the earth, remain calm. We are all here today for a long lineage, a long line. No matter what our bloodlines, all bloodlines. A long line of love and struggle. And love and struggle. And love and struggle. And pain and joy. And love and struggle. We will now process in honor of the ancestors.